For those of you who are just joining this webinar, this is the ID webinar on high streets and town centres. We'll start shortly. I can just see the numbers ticking up, so people are arriving. We'll give it a couple of Okay, well, I think we'll make a start. There's a good number here already, and others are joining as we're going along. So, well, very warm welcome. Good morning. Very warm welcome to the Institute of Economic Development session on high streets and town centres more generally. And I think any of us would agree that there's probably no more pressing issue in economic development right now. And so we were very keen to pull this together. And you know, thanks go to Caroline Baker, John Till, Corinne Day, and Steve Stewart, who are here to share some of their thoughts on the subject, some of their experiences, some of their work, and we'll introduce as we go along. What we're going to do is we're going to have 10 minutes from each of our panelists by way of thought-provoking ideas, thoughts, what they've been up to, but really by way of a session that starts to make you think about the questions that you want to ask as part of the session. And with that in mind, please do type the questions as you're going along. I won't interrupt the speakers, but what I will do is save them and ask them as we go along. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Nigel Wilcock. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Economic Development, but I'm really just here to chair the questions when we get to that point. And I'm going to firstly hand over to Caroline Baker. So Caroline's the managing partner of Cushman and Wakefield in the northwest of England, and I'm sure she can say a little bit more about herself by way of introduction. So Caroline, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nigel, and good morning, everybody. So yes, I'm Caroline Baker, coming to you from a sunny Manchester, I'm pleased to announce. I've worked for Cushman and Wakefield, DTZ, for the last almost 25 years, and throughout that time I have worked with local authorities and developers to support the transformation of town centres. And clearly we're in unprecedented times, not only because of COVID, but actually the scale of public sector money that is available for our town centres. There hasn't been a time throughout the time I've worked where we've been able to see £20 million worth of capital money potentially being available to local authorities and their partners to drive the transformation of their centres. However, for any of you struggling with some of your high streets, particularly those who, for example, might have a 1960s shopping centre built out of concrete that is half empty, £20 million doesn't necessarily go a long way. So what I'm hoping to do with you now is to share some of my experience, particularly around working with the sectors to try to stimulate investment in town centres. And then I'll finish by identifying 3 key areas where I think there's lessons that I've learned from working with a number of partners such as yourselves over the last 20 or so years to support the transformation of town centres. So firstly, I just wanted to talk a little bit around 3 key areas. So particularly around the residential market, the office market, and then around diversifying town centre offers. So from a residential perspective, clearly a lot of our town centres already have quite a lot of residential development. And for some of you, that might be beautiful cottages within walking distance of a town centre, or lovely Georgian villas. But unfortunately for some of my clients in the Northwest, that's often an oversupply of old terrace properties or 1960s social housing, which doesn't necessarily create attraction from a wide range of target audience. So one of the key things that we need to think about is how do we start to shift the offer, provide a better choice in town centres around residential homes. Now, clearly, one of the first options to look at is whether you can transform former or vacant retail units. Because in many cases, often they were residential originally, but we often find there is an issue around viability with the transformation and repurposing of retail assets. And one of the things that we really need to look at to actually deliver a different choice within town centres is creating and delivering modern, attractive accommodation within walking distance of a town centre. And there are some really good examples of that happening, particularly if I use examples of my experience in the Northwest. For example, the award-winning Timekeepers cottages that have been delivered on the edge of Salford within a walking distance of Manchester city centre, attracting providing a different choice for occupiers. And we've been busy working with Stockport Town Centre as part of the first Greater Manchester Mayoral Development Corporation area within a town centre to look at how you can repurpose land to the west of Stockport Station, a very sustainable and accessible location, into a new community, a new neighbourhood, which can attract a different type of community into the heart of the town centre, not only providing choice of homes, but also supporting footfall and dwell time within within Stockport Town Centre itself. So in terms of the offices as well, so moving on to the second area is really recognising the importance of the town centre as a place where you can provide accommodation. Now, it's not very long ago that I can remember speaking to some of my local authority clients talking about a new concept that we were starting to see in London, which was flexible workspace, the types of WeWork, etc. And that was something that we sort of said, well, we'll start to see it happening in outside of London, sure. And obviously that has started to happen. And I think that is one of the things that we have seen through COVID, that acceleration of trends that were starting to happen and how we can really start to embrace those in our local areas. So providing new flexible office space is really important for the future of our town centres. Now, clearly, I'm not here today to say that it's the end of offices in city centres. However, I think there's a recognition that post-COVID and when we get back to some form of normality, we won't be looking, or it's unlikely that people will be spending 5 days a week in a city centre office location, or equally wanting to spend 5 days a week in their bedrooms, but actually they'll want to find something that is much more of a flexible approach, where they may be in a city location one or 2 days a week, they might be at home 1 or 2 days a week, but they might want some flexible space in an alternative sustainable location. And that's where town centres can really come to their own. And we're seeing some really good examples across the country of repurposing some of the larger former retail units with the likes of House of Fraser, BHS, M&S, Debenhams, that is being looked at to see whether we can deliver flexible work accommodation and creative space within the hearts of town centres. I think we have to recognise that the ability to deliver speculative new office space within some town centres because of rental values and viability is going to be problematic, but repurposing of former space from one use into another use is something that we should be embracing. And then moving on to the third area that I think is really important in terms of how we start to repurpose some of our space is recognising the importance of diversification. So clearly it's really important that we deliver somewhere to live and somewhere to work in the town centre, as well as the retail offer. But also I think thinking about the wider role that the town centres can play. So for example, something that we've been looking at with clients, particularly in areas like Cumbria, is recognising the importance of being able to deliver accommodation for older people within a town centre, as opposed to that accommodation being spread over a large area where service providers, both in terms of health and social services, potentially are going to struggle to deliver services efficiently over a wide area. But actually delivering that on the edge of a town centre where there are existing resources can be a really useful opportunity. Around diversification, thinking about our audience is really important. So particularly around families. So how do we get families to spend time after school or during weekends or during holidays in a town centre? And that was something that we really targeted when we were working in Altrincham, and that's generally seen as a sort of really positive transformation of an area. And then finally, I think in terms of that diversifying the offer is also thinking about how you might be able to attract wider range of partners, particularly around whether you can tap into a local tourism market and create more reasons to attract people into the town centre or into the high street through culture and leisure. And that doesn't necessarily need to be about buildings. Very importantly, that can actually be about a broad programme of events that will attract people into a town centre. And there's lots of really good examples of that across the country. So in terms of concluding my slot, I thought it would be useful just to sort of bring 3 key lessons together. So I wanted just to briefly touch on the importance of a place prospectus, articulating what a town centre or a high street has to offer, keeping stakeholders updated and informed, and finally really working with local developers, investors and occupiers. So in terms of a place prospectus, what we've found in the really successful areas and where we've started to shift perceptions of an area is to the importance of having something that is presented in a format that developers, investors and occupiers can read and articulate. So definitely not a planning tome of 50 odd pages, but something that might be 10 to 15 pages, very glossy, presenting very clearly to those that the market what is great about a particular place, and they start to get that. If it's presented to them in a language they understand, it starts to shift that. So going back over 10 years, we did something similar for Manchester, and we've recently done, a couple of years ago, prepared a place prospectus around residential in Preston, and we're really starting to see a buzz and the developers starting to look at opportunities on the back of that. Linked to that, the second point and the second lesson to learn is the importance of keeping all stakeholders engaged in the process. So that's articulating to other partners what's actually going on. We found in a number of places there's lots of strategies and lots of people doing things, but other people don't know about that. And the more we can bring that together to coalesce around common objectives, the more successful towns are. And very importantly, about keeping businesses and communities involved. So a good example of that is #BrilliantBarrow, which was established as part of the Town Deal initiative and then used for Future High Street bid as well. As a really good mechanism or a medium by which lots of different partners could be brought together. And finally, my experience has been that in terms of engaging with developers, investors or occupiers, you get most impact by engaging with local people. So if somebody's making a decision based out of London, thinking about an area in the northeast, if they come across a difficult time in terms of viability, they're more likely to stop and move on to the next town. If you can engage with your local investors, local developers, you're much more likely to encourage them to keep working at something and make things work and have a much greater impact. So the really successful places are those that have been able to engage with local passionate developers, investors and occupiers, because they want to see the town centres or high streets transformed as much as you or I do. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. And great to get the opportunity to hear about Cushman and Wakefield's work in this space, because it's clear that you've been involved very widely in a lot of these schemes. So thank you very much for that, Caroline. Going to move on now to John, and I should say, and maybe should have said at the beginning, that we've got a great geographic mix today as well. So Caroline's talked a fair bit about the Northwest. John's worked nationally. Corinne's from the South Coast in Newhaven, and Steve's in Perth. So I hope that by the end of the session you'll have heard plenty. But Caroline was talking about articulating this office in terms of a language that's understood by investors, developers and occupiers. And it seems to me that's at the heart of much of what John does at Thinking Place. So John, founding director of Thinking Place, good to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Nigel, and good morning, everyone. Great to be with you. Yeah, Thinking Place has been around for 15 years. We work solely with places. We don't do anything else, and we try and help repurpose place by them creating a forward-looking story, a narrative of place, as you described and as Caroline described. At the moment, working in places as diverse as Hampshire, Surrey, Gloucester, Staffordshire, Torbay, etc. And have a look at the website. There's lots of examples on there at thinkingplace.co.uk. And really at the moment, I guess, we're in the midst of a massive change programme in places for our high streets and town centres, and a change programme that they probably don't want, which has been put upon them. A change programme of online shopping, Brexit, changes in working patterns, new technology. These things are happening to places. And then there's COVID, as has been talked about, the great accelerator of things in places. I want to talk about some shuns or ION words that have affected people. So I've got various shun words through my presentation. So if we start with dislocation. So people, to start with, have been totally dislocated from their normal way of working and their relationship with place. And that has resulted in them having a connection with the place that they live in, which they probably didn't have before. It's changed. So the bit where they went off and maybe even had a stronger relationship with where they worked and spent more work time has disappeared. So from dislocation to connection, we've moved to, in many cases, affection. So people have got to really quite love the place that they're in and enjoy spending time with it. They've rediscovered it, or for many, discovered it. And how do you influence? Forget trying to control it. How do you influence all of that? And if we look at the heading for today about what's the story, well, part of it is you need to have a story. And it goes back in a way to what Caroline talked about in terms of that prospectus. What in this world is your place going to be for? What is its distinctiveness? Because you need to have this story. Your stakeholders need to have this story to make sense of what's going on, to have confidence in the future. And the other bit that's really important, I think, in terms of having this, and it goes back again to what Caroline said about all these funding pots. You don't want to be reinventing what your place is going to be for every time there's a funding pot. You need to have one clear view that people can buy into of the future of the place. And then every time an opportunity for investment or funding comes along, that is contributing to delivering that shared story, that shared view of place. And people have turned to what matters most in this period, you know, family, friends, their place. The little things matter lots now and have done. A walk, the local park, that friendly shop that we didn't even know was there. But people still need to belong to a place with an identity and a future. And therefore shaping that has probably never been more important. In fact, most of the people we're talking about have probably thought a lot more about where they're going to and where they're going to work and etc. than the actual place that they're in. So my view would be that it's time for shared, stakeholder-inspired places. For me, the traditional model of various forms of governance, of every so often people voting, and then people just getting on with the job or getting on with the life, surely that must change. It isn't totally fit for purpose. So at the moment, the best we have is kind of one-off, and here's another shun, one-off consultation on a plan, a development. This is as much as people often get involved. There might be a business improvement district, there might be a chamber, or we might have to consult with people because we're a local authority. Surely there has to be a model that harnesses the talent, the ideas, the energy, the contacts, and the passion of stakeholders in an ongoing way. You shouldn't have to be elected to have influence. You just need to be engaged. And here's a really good shun that I love: collaboration. We had it in crisis. We now need it proactively to rebuild and to grow places. If you engage people in their place's future, collaboration then, it's not being forced, it's happening naturally and neutrally as part of being place-led. And place-led is critical. So this produces and widens leadership in place. It supports the local authority, but it also creates a really exciting, different, dynamic sales force for the place. And that takes me to another of these shun words, and that is celebration. And boy, we could do with some celebration after the 15 months that we've had. We need our stakeholders telling their place story, believing in their place story, bringing out things that demonstrate it, the businesses, those wonderful attractions, the talent, etc., that's often hidden. Because we've got to make the most of what we've got. Now, these things are there, and people are desperate to be positive about their place. So yes, there are some handouts for some places, but not for all. And we have to make the most of what we've got. So the networks, the contacts are vital, of these people, of the stakeholders of place. They can encourage startups, attract investment, provide that welcome that other businesses want to see. And my final shun on my little journey is we each have to create our own place sensation, that interest in place, that excitement in place. If we're going to have other towns, suburban locations, taking on a different role with people in shared workspace, doing things differently, then they have to work in a different way. They have to provide some of the experience that people found in cities. So there needs to be storytelling, there needs to be animation of space, there needs to be colour, there needs to be events. And all of a sudden, the space between the buildings becomes the most important place. And we look at the community coming together in a way that it used to. It comes together for music, for food, for chat, for a meeting. A place actually where you have fun. You don't just work there, you don't just live there. And that's a different way of thinking about many of our town centres. And that's about having that shared story that creates that distinctiveness as a framework, which leads to that truly shared place, which I think we've all want to enjoy being in. And you can see it in so many places now. Look at the redevelopment of the market in Doncaster, the plans in Darlington. These are about creating shared spaces for people to enjoy with quirky, independent, small shops, food and drink in the evening, not late night vertical drinking. So at the moment, what we have, this is a real opportunity, probably a once in a lifetime opportunity to do something different and think differently about our places. In fact, it's not even an opportunity, it's an absolute imperative to do something different for town centres, for high streets, to reshape them, to repurpose them. But that cannot just be about physicality. That's about how we think about them. That's how our culture needs to change about how we use them. And then they will be there for everybody in the future, fulfilling a role that I think we can all see as being really, really important. Thanks, Nigel.
Thanks, John, and thanks for that insight. And I'm pleased to see that questions rolled in, so that's good. So that sort of prompt me to remind everybody to ask these as they go along. Now, the next speaker is Corinne. So Corinne Day from who's joined us from Newhaven. So Corinne's the program director of the Newhaven Enterprise Zone, and she has a handful of slides to talk us through her experiences. So Corinne, thanks.
Hello, I'm going to come to my slides shortly because otherwise they'll just distract me from my flow. So I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Corinne Day, the Programme Director for the Newhaven Enterprise Zone. Firstly, I'd like to thank IID for inviting me today to speak, and I will try to bring my own experience and insight to the discussion, hopefully in a way as well that contributes and causes pause for a little bit of reflection. In my pre-event briefing, I was informed that IID have asked members their top concerns at present, and no doubt amongst the wild swinging between frustration, inertia, and then resetting that we're all experiencing, and that's just about our lifestyles, is a shared concern about how COVID has accelerated what we already knew needed addressing, and that does include lifestyle as well, I think. It has been easy for some to tune out of the decline of the high street narrative during COVID if it isn't your business. You hear people saying it doesn't really affect me, I can get that online. And especially once we got over that glitch of how retailers figured out how to make returns easier and to create some kind of chat bot that could deal with your issues. And also, if you go back a little bit before pre-COVID, meeting up on a Saturday in town is a thing we did reminiscent of our teenage years. And gradually that desire to shop in that way has changed probably with our age, with our lifestyle, and also consumer habits. But I think what's really interesting is that COVID has accelerated convenience in all manner of ways, the ways in which we experience services, how we seek a consult from our GP, how we access learning, where we eat, socialise and shop. The last two are particularly important here in my story about Newhaven. People had already stopped socialising in our high street. Nobody came to shop in Newhaven. We had already hit rock bottom some time ago. So we could not offer convenience in a traditional sense, and we already knew we needed to do something differently. We have been quietly working on our story on what we want to be for some time now. And when COVID hit, we had just realised how important the story is through the eyes of those who live there, those people who don't shop or hang out there, and therefore what our future could look like. So I'd like to give you a short overview of Newhaven, what we've been doing, what happens next, and just to leave you with a few images to see if they match up with the ambition and the narrative that I'm about to describe to you. So Newhaven is a small industrial harbour town in East Sussex on the edge of the South Downs National Park. We're only 9 miles from Brighton, and we have significant potential to grow. We're very unusual in that we have a direct ferry service to Dieppe, and we're industrial in nature amidst a very rural and affluent wider environment. Newhaven has excellent transport routes, innovative businesses in offshore renewables and marine engineering, a physical capacity to grow, and is a great value location to live and to work. However, the town centre has suffered considerable decline in recent years and needs repurposing. The community has been promised a great deal that hasn't been delivered, and the image of Newhaven regionally and nationally is either of a struggling coastal town or just non-existent. I'm not sure what's worse. So in 2017, an enterprise zone was established as a mechanism to drive local growth. It's part of the Greater Brighton City Deal area. Newhaven has also been successfully, we bid for the Future High Street funding and received that. The Towns Fund announcement is imminent, and we've just submitted our bid for the Levelling Up Fund, which, if these are successful, will be transformational for the town. Whilst Newhaven faces many challenges, it does have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to repurpose itself as a thriving industrial town, a centre for marine and our creative community. So where are we now? In 2019, we underwent a significant process of place-based engagement, and we listened very carefully to the stakeholders of Newhaven. And there were a number of things that really mattered to them, which we needed to address. Key to this is changing the narrative from dump to diamond. It was and still remains key for creating a confidence and optimism in the town's future. We definitely suffer from a poverty of aspiration. We have developed a shared view of the place and what it could be for. And this has been very much at the front and centre of all our bids for funding, and consistently compelling, I think, in how we've outlined the interventions required to transform our town. Then came COVID. Materially, COVID has not really altered the state of play for Newhaven. As a declining port town, as I mentioned in my intro, it was already felt to be at its lowest ebb. Arguably, things will be harder now post-COVID, but I think it's definitely created a change in headspace. People in all walks of life have had to adjust to a pace of change not known in our lifetimes, and now is a good time to do things differently. We have begun to really invest in just one business case for Newhaven that has the same strategic case at the front, that uses the process of economic and financial appraisal to inform objective judgments. We've looked at the market for delivery based on also the market demand we're seeing and the financial case for this, both as an investor and as a landlord. So we're beginning to develop this business case and a set of assumptions within which we can change as change occurs and opportunities come forward. So it's not a static document, it's something over the next 25 years that is our plan, in effect our pipeline of projects that will deliver against the story, and the funding follows and is part of that. What we're beginning to witness, therefore, as a result of this, is that people are buying into the place, that the narrative is actually driving the action, that the story can be seen through the eyes of our stakeholders. And I think, it's beginning to be reflected on the decisions on the ground. So this is really powerful because it also begins to unpick the broken promises and deliver against that shared view of the place. So what happens next for us? We're in a critical moment. Its ambition around repurposing and transformation, I think, speaks to the current language of policymakers and therefore funding opportunity. But today's inquiry is asking, what's the story? Well, Newhaven has rehearsed countless times over the years the significant investment required in infrastructure. And as I mentioned, we have the pipeline of development beginning to emerge. But the key issue for a town like Newhaven has been to set out this proposition for something better, a shared plan for the place, not simply what the town can attract now in its current form, which is the tendency for the market and hence the failure, but to show the ambition in the way in which we get there. We are beginning to see the buy-in through the level of inquiry. Despite the global pandemic, Newhaven's done very well. We're seeing higher value businesses inquiring about premises, the type of food offer we would have only dreamt of a year or so ago. A lobster shack's just opened on our beach amongst one of the many. Artists and creatives wanting a platform in Newhaven to perform and to host festivals and really great events that usually we would associate with other towns. We don't want to be those other towns. Newhaven knows its story now and it's putting it out there. We want to surprise people that this is what you get here. But I think they are coming because of the story. We're told by people it excites them. They want to be a part of that change and to be central to that. And the thing that's emerging out of Newhaven that we're not quite sure exactly what it is, but we talk a lot about the grit of Newhaven and becoming the pearl. We are about marine in the making. We're about valuing the creative freedom of the place, and we celebrate the energy of our industry, be it grotty or not. So this proposition is driving us forwards on the belief that it can happen, and it would appear to be happening. So I'd like to just give you a couple of examples before I conclude and also show you some photos. So our successful future high street plan to reimagine Newhaven sets out our ambition to repurpose an old supermarket and car park into significant new creative workspace. We're also creating an urban living room in the high street from an old car park. And we're hoping both of these things will create new footfall and vitality to our centre, building on what we have, but also then bringing a new business to those who are there in the centre. We also need, Newhaven's a small town, but it's quite disparate. Part of the Future High Streets Fund is to connect the town centre where people work, live, and also the entry points into which they arrive through meaningful wayfinding. We were also one of the 100 towns selected for the accelerated projects as part of the Towns Fund. And we've been told we're one of the first in the country to deliver on this. So Railway Quay is a key site right in the centre of our town, by the train station, next to the town centre, critical to our longer term plans. It's also an enterprise zone site. We've now transformed that derelict site into a vibrant social space. We're welcoming visitors just off the ferry and residents alike. We've established this gorgeous riverside bistro. The visual language is front and centre, which I'll show you in a minute. And we have a welcome and a cycle hub, and also other social amenities are being developed to embrace the waterside, that marine in the making. This site is also a meanwhile use, but it will act as a baseline against which we'll assess the longer term redevelopment of the site. So we've just done a design-led feasibility study with 4 architect houses. It engaged the community to identify the options for the future and how we house and support the creative sector and the grow on space for other new spaces that are coming online at the moment. As well, lastly, as an example, adjacent to Railway Quay is an old University Technical College building. It's a listed building which reflects the town's legacy, and it's sited again on the riverside next to Railway Quay. We've just got the Getting Building Fund, which has enabled us to redevelop this. We've been working with a national partner to develop a concept and create market demand for a marine hub to provide employment floor space for this sector and the support required, but also a skills and training centre that enables the sector to grow. Again, bringing people and revitalising and animating in the centre of our town in a way that is different to what was there previously in terms of retail. We've worked really hard to create this shared view, to create a buy-in to this ambition, but now we really need clear signals to investors, to the early adopters, that we are indeed doing things differently. We need to begin to warm up our muscles and say yes to things rather than say no. We have to continue to build upon this momentum created and not fall back to a position of making it harder for the private sector to invest in our place. We can't do it alone just with this funding. We need the private sector investment. So yes, the pipeline is important, but so too are the messages we send out to early adopters, to investors, that this is a place that gets things done. This will help enormously in creating confidence and demonstrating that Newhaven is a place of collaboration and therefore a place where enterprise and people can thrive. If we wish to create spaces for creatives, for industry and enterprise, for well-being, then the town halls need to follow through on the promise of doing what it takes to reimagine and repurpose our town centres and high street. If we are to keep up with the pace of this accelerated change, then this needs to be reflected in our own processes and decision making, through planning, how we procure, how we promote opportunity locally. To be transparent and accountable for what we say we will do, to be held to account, to let the narrative drive that action and not the politics. I know that's incredibly difficult, but that really needs to be front and centre for us. The place needs to decide and drive what happens, and space needs to be given for the wider stakeholders to do so. The business case can help to set out how we deliver and how the market can do this, the mechanisms for doing so. I would love to share with other towns how you're doing this, the pitfalls, the lessons, the innovations, because we're certainly learning at the moment. This is our next challenge in Newhaven, for shared and considered risk-taking with our stakeholders, using funding to unlock barriers, ensuring collaborative and timely processes so that we can really ride this momentum, keep up with the pace of change and not miss this opportunity that change is bringing to our high streets and towns. So I would just lastly, very quickly, because I'm aware of time, is share with you. I'm hoping it works. Is it going to work? Yes, quickly. Can you see my screen? Nod someone on the panel. Yes, excellent. So just very quickly, I'm just going to show you. Here's Newhaven. That's the ferry coming in. When it comes in, it just changes the dynamic and the size of the town. It's a small town and this massive hulk comes in, bringing loads of people. There's a view of Newhaven from across the coastal path, looking across to Seaford. We're just nestled in the port there. You can see the lighthouse. You come to our town centre, it's a small town centre. There's lots of unused buildings and shops and car parks. So this is where we're looking at changing these spaces. These are some of the people who work in our town, young, creative makers, moving across from Brighton, London, Hastings. You know, that the town is itching for change and space to grow. This is one of the images of a new creative workspace. This is a former co-op building. So we're moving now from horrible images of shoddy shops and vacant spaces to artist impressions. And I'm hoping soon these impressions turn into photos of demolition sites and the change that's actually happening. The site I mentioned, Railway Quay, is here. It's nestled on the riverside. You can see the UTC building there. It's a listed building and the site adjacent to it. So this has changed into this. We now have not just a picture, a real thing. We've developed an area for the bistro on the riverside, the cycle hub, the welcome centre. Our visual language of the place is reflected in the umbrellas and the site hoardings, and it's really pleasurable to see people the last few weeks sitting out, enjoying that space, which they've really asked for. The building next door, the UTC, this is an impression of what it will become over the next year once we get going with the marine hub, vessels bringing their fish in, a wholesale fish market, restaurant, skills and training around marine, totally repurposing what that area is for and bringing footfall to the place with that adjacent bistro you saw just next door to capture some of that footfall and connect to our town centre. And I think that's the last thing I'd say as well, is that sometimes we look in isolation at our centres and don't think about that permeability and connection. So the challenge for Newhaven is this. That's Railway Quay and UTC as you can see it now. As you're looking at this is our town centre on the other side of the river. How do we start to create that connectivity and permeability to the others and inspire the town hall and our politicians that this don't be frightened of this stuff. It's big and it's bold, but we have some money now and we have a vision and a proposition. The market wants to come. So the next job for us, and I'll leave it there, is that we need to convince our politicians that this can be done. This can be done and people want it to happen. So thank you very much for listening.
Corinne, thank you for presenting. Thanks for talking through the challenges through to the vision. So thank you very much. We do have a question that's come in, which is around how we engage with our communities. We've also heard, I think, a few times reference to local on this call, which is maybe something we'll pick up as well. So do keep the questions coming in. But next, Stephen Stewart is here from Perth in his day job, Director of Communications for Stagecoach, but also Vice Chair of Perth's Leadership Board. So Stephen, welcome. Thanks for coming, and look forward to hearing about your experiences.
Thanks very much, Nigel. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Right. So I'm just briefly going to cover what is Perth's journey to become the most sustainable small city in Europe. I've only got one slide, which I'm going to use to frame a lot of the discussion, and you'll actually see from that a lot of common themes that everyone has been talking about this morning. So just to quickly frame this, the starting point. So Perth's one of Scotland's 7 cities. We're located right at the heart of Scotland. We're a small city, a population of about 50,000 people, and we've got a wider Perth and Kinross region that is largely actually rural. About 7,000 or so businesses, mostly SMEs and micro businesses across the region. And we're also part of a wider Tay Cities area, which is the 3rd largest economic region in Scotland. Now, 3 years ago, we began work that was focused on Perth Place, exactly what John was talking about earlier on. What was it for? What was the story? And then how could we use that story to transform the city and the wider region? Now, interestingly, we've always had a very rich heritage. We're the former capital of Scotland. Kings and queens used to get crowned at Scone just up the road. We've got some of the most stunning countryside you'll see anywhere in the world. We've always had a solid economy, but these assets were very much underexploited. I think the challenge here in Perth was that we didn't have that impetus that things were really, really bad and had to change. And I suppose I'd sum that up by saying Perth was nice, but it wasn't noticed. So we needed a clear and coherent story that all stakeholders could really get behind, and to generate, I think, a renewed sense of pride in the city and the region, and also project Perth outwards, both to Scotland and to the wider world. So we developed that story. We did that in collaboration with Thinking Place and most importantly, with the stakeholders in our city and wider city region. And we really focused on 3 key themes that summed up our strengths. Firstly, our independent culture. We've got some fantastic boutique retailers here in Perth, world-class independent food and drink producers, everything from whiskey to soft fruit. We've got a high number of SMEs and new enterprises, and it really is a place of creativity and innovation. Secondly, our local and international connectivity. Sitting here in the heart of Scotland, that is an incredibly powerful part of our story, where we're 90 minutes from 85% of Scotland's population. We've got good transport links, good airport access, and also we're a perfect location for work and leisure. And I don't think it's any surprise that that is why several corporate HQs, Stagecoach, a big transport company that I work for, and also the renewable energy giant SSE have got their headquarters here in the city. And the third strand that we focused in on was quality of life. And I think this is something that's going to be incredibly important to people as we emerge from COVID. The region that we've got here has got exceptional quality of life, thriving arts and culture scene, strong food and drink offer, doorstep access to world-class natural environment. And all of those factors are the reasons why we're regularly amongst the top locations in UK quality of life surveys. Just at the turn of the year there, we were also named the happiest place in Scotland. So all of those attributes were summed up in 3 words: live life well. And that is really what we built our story around since we did that work around about the middle of 2018. And as we were hearing earlier on, we've also supported that by some high quality visual imagery and a toolkit for stakeholders to use. So we've got a story, but that's not enough. And I think the leadership and ambition was absolutely critical to us here in Perth, because for many years there was what I would call a complacency that left leadership in our region to the local authority. And generally, as someone who was born here, moved away and come back, I think I'd say that citizens were happy just for Perth to remain a small Scottish market town. What this partnership working on the story did was to bring together the private, the public and the third sectors to give us a real drive for a new approach in our city region. And that led to the establishment of the Perth City Leadership Forum. That's a network of local leaders who are passionate about shaping our city and the wider region's future. And the forum is not a talking shop. It is about making things happen, involving people, generating ideas, and really developing the practical solutions that will make a difference. So we've come together around one very clear ambition, and that is to see Perth become the most sustainable small city in Europe. Last year, we held an online international conference that showcased some quite amazing examples of sustainable city design and reinvention from across Europe, everywhere from Malmo to Ghent. And we had a keynote speaker who was the former mayor of Copenhagen, Bo Asmus Kjeldegaard. And when we heard from all of these different presenters, they gave us an insight really into what was possible for Perth. Things like traffic-free city centres, carbon neutral living, energy security from city waste, and also concepts like the 15-minute city. On the back of that, we're driving forward 6 core work streams for the city region on a series of short, medium and long-term initiatives. So that's looking at shaping the growing city, zero carbon Perth, transport and digital connectivity, inclusion and social justice, enterprise and prosperity, and revitalising the city centre, which that last theme is the most relevant, I think, for us for our discussion today. And that is looking at a future for our city centre beyond retail. I think is a common theme that we've heard this morning. Like others, we've been affected here in Perth by the loss of some big national retailers like Debenhams. We're looking to build on the strength of the independence that I mentioned as one of our core themes, but also looking at how we repurpose empty units, including through city centre-based housing and education. We've got a university campus here in Perth, part of the University of the Highlands and Islands. Really important student population who can create a great vibe in our city centre. We're also looking at how we restore our city centre buildings. A lot of fantastic Georgian buildings in our city, but we're looking to transform some of them. We've just completed work on a former derelict church, which has been transformed into a performance arts venue. That has just opened this month. We're looking at how we leverage our historical and cultural strengths as part of a new offer supported by events and stronger marketing. We opened earlier this year the Creative Exchange, which was a former school, which is now a tremendous workspace for artisans and creatives. So really using that space that we've got and transforming it into something that is useful and showcases our strengths. Also, this desire for a greener and healthier environment, which is definitely there and we're seeing post-COVID. We're looking at rethinking how people access our city centre. We want to deliver more focus on walking, cycling, public transport, as well as rethinking the idea of parking provision. We're progressing marketing campaigns to lock in that local spend. I think this Live Local movement is really taking off, and we're seeing a real desire for that in our city. Just at Christmas there in 2020, we had a lot of heavy promotion of our local independence on the Small City Big Personality web platform. We've got a strong city gift card programme that was developed by MyConnex, who are a fintech company that are based here in Perth. They actually piloted the gift card programme here in Perth, and now they've delivered, I think, about 60 plus town and city gift card programmes all across the UK and in Ireland. Just moving on to the third theme, what we've achieved already has been built out of strong collaboration and mutual trust. That has been absolutely central to what we've already delivered and what we're going to deliver in the future. Just as an example of that, just at the turn of the year, we had some fantastic news around about the Stone of Destiny coming back to our city. That's one of Scotland's most iconic historical objects. That's where they used the crowning of the kings and queens in Scotland. It's currently Edinburgh Castle, but it's going to be the centrepiece for a new £26.5 million City Hall Museum right in the heart of the city. So going to bring in hundreds of thousands of visitors to the area, create a significant boost for tourism when it opens in 2024. So something fantastic to look forward to. The key thing about that was that it was about, I think, a 7-year campaign to bring that back to the city. That brought together the Perth and Kinross Council, local businesses, the wider community, but it really was that new leadership and ambition and collaboration that was driven by the work on the Perth story that really got that project over the line. And that collaboration is now something that we do as a matter of course. We work very closely with the Invest in Perth team. We've done things like hotel pitch events down in London, trying to up the standard of hotels here in our region, which is going to be incredibly important if we're going to get people to stay and experience our city and city region longer. And also we saw that collaboration in the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. All of those links, all of these really important relationships that we built up working on the Perth story have really followed through into how they were all mobilised and worked together on a plan to meet the challenges of COVID. So we produced an economic wellbeing plan that will take us through to 2028. And that was produced by a business task force that was made up of all of the same stakeholders that we brought together in working on the Perth story. So that really gives us a reset and recovery roadmap. The final point I want to cover off is being around about our Perth Ambassador programme. I think John had mentioned in his remarks around about having stakeholders who can tell that story. Again, our Perth Ambassador programme is a private sector driven group that is supported by Perth and Kinross Council. It's an incredibly strong network that benefits both our members and the region here as well. And how we do that is that during COVID, we understood that people had a problem in terms of the financial resources that they could devote. So we didn't ask them for any membership fees. What we have asked them for is their time. So around 4 hours a month to champion the future of our region, whether that's through reinforcing the message that we've developed, joining working groups, taking part in events, spearheading local projects, working on sector pitches, or being part of delegations. So that Perth 100 group is really a strong collective. It's been strong during the pandemic, and we're going to be launching a new website and engagement programme just in a few days at our next Perth Ambassador meeting this month. Looking ahead, finally, we're going to benefit from the £700 million Tay Cities deal. We have got another big city just 20 miles down the road from us here along the Tay in Dundee. Previously, we would have seen Dundee as a threat and a bit of an enemy, but we're working together along with some other regions in the northeast of Scotland on the Tay Cities deal, which will really help transform our region and deliver up to 6,000 new jobs, many of them in the sustainability sphere. So what's the lessons that we've learned? I think leadership, ambition, collaboration, engagement, and having that clear and consistent story to tell. These are the factors that have helped turn around the mindset in our city, and I think opened up new opportunities as we look beyond the pandemic. Thank you.
Stephen, no, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm struck with the phrase "nice but not noticed," which was one of the things you pulled out, but also perhaps a story about well, a city in your case that hadn't reached rock bottom, but you still managed to engage and get people to move on, which is maybe a different story from some of the ones we've heard today. So thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to say that while you were talking, some more questions have arrived too. So what I was going to do is just go through those now and pose them to panel members, and I think the first one is to each of you in turn. A couple of thoughts perhaps on this question about how you engage with stakeholders. You've all talked about the importance of engaging with stakeholders, but I also hear quite a lot about or think about apathy in some places and a lack of engagement. So I mean, let's go around in the order that we originally spoke. How do you think you've most successfully engaged with these stakeholders? And Caroline, you must have done plenty of this in some of your projects.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, one of the key things is to make sure that you articulate to everyone the benefits of them getting involved. So clearly people, we've had periods where people feel as though they've been consulted to death, that they've been sort of asked about things, but then they don't see clearly the implications and the changes that happen from that. I think importantly, when we're looking at changing places, it's really important that we acknowledge the existing community, that we don't just focus on the new and the others, that we think about how we respond to some of the needs of our existing community, and then to really articulate clearly the benefits of doing things that will attract other people to an area, as opposed to seeing that other people coming in are going to create just a hassle on their services and sort of negative things. So the more that we can engage with people and be clear around the benefits that will accrue as a consequence, that we are listening to people and trying to do what we can. I think the big thing that I've found is that it's important to communicate as opposed to just listen. So where we've worked in areas and people ask for particular things to happen, and we know that they're never going to be able to happen because of technical issues, that we don't assume that we shouldn't explain that to people, that it just doesn't happen. It's really important to go back to them and explain in an appropriate way why we won't be able to move some things forward, but which of their ideas we will be able to move forward. So there isn't a disconnect between what people feel as though they're taking time to say something, and then what happens 5 years down the line is completely different than what they ever asked for, and they don't understand why it happened in that way. And often there's very good explanation as to why that's not happened in that way, but we haven't taken the time to go back to the community and stakeholders and engage with them and explain that process.
No, that's a good point, and I guess we can all imagine that having happened in the past. So yeah, thank you, John. Anything to add to Caroline's views?
No, I would agree with all of that. I think the key bit when we're with stakeholders is we're actually saying this is not about consultation, it's about engagement. You might be consulted on certain things, but the engagement, this is about we want your long-term involvement in the place. So we want to hear your views, but we don't just want to hear your views and then you go away again. What we want is we want to inspire you to get involved with the place. So for us, a lot of the time, it is about that inspiration bit, about articulating what other places have achieved by doing things differently. That if you get involved, you can do really special things. Because of course, a lot of people, they only know what's happening in their place. So if you open their eyes to the art of the possible, then all of a sudden, yes, there's a what's in it for me, but then there's some quite exciting things that you can see that other places have done. And I think that's definitely the secret.
Yes, a bit of a Donald Rumsfeld, you don't know what you don't know sort of thing, I guess. Corinne, and I'll just throw in. I mean, you've heard what the other two have said, and the other thing that has come up in the question, maybe for you and Stephen, having done this for real, engaging different parts of the community as well. I mean, there's always going to be the people who are the professional engagers, but what about the different age groups, the different bodies?
Thank you. I would say a really important thing for us in Newhaven has been the kind of relevance and reality of it. And like John said, steering away for consultation. So we've tried to do things and take positions on stuff. So people had a strength of feeling and could get engaged. So just in terms of different groups, we've taken it to people rather than expect them to come to us. So with the schools, we were dealing with the kind of 14 to 16-year-olds. We went to them, we were part of their class and extracurricular, and they were involved in that debate about, what Newhaven is. The way we engaged with them was fun. And so then they told their friends, and then their friends wanted to be part of the next one because it sounded good. And then we went back to them 6 months later and said, right, you said this is how we've interpreted it. It looks like this. What do you think? And now we've got them involved, for example, in a design workshop for Railway Quay, so that the young people are working with architects and planners. So it's relevant to them because it's about career, but it's also about their town, and they're getting to interpret that story into something real. And similarly with some of the older people in Newhaven, as part of that original kind of storytelling, we went and we listened to them in their setting, and they told us from their point of view what Newhaven was and what they thought it could be. And so I think for me, that kind of relevance, making it very real and easy, just make it easy for people and make sure you demonstrate that you're listening to them, and you go back again and say, we listened, have we got this right? Would be my learning.
And just a sort of a follow on from me, if I may. I mean, I can see that as you make baby steps, people do start to notice that things are changing, but we all know that big scale regeneration takes a huge length of time. Do you sense you'll be able to bring people with you for that length of time? Or how do you see that?
We're really careful to. Railway Quay is a good example where we've just opened the bistro on Railway Quay, and it's a new project. We're very careful to rehearse what's happening today in what we're talking about with the future. So we've just done this feasibility study with our champions group for Newhaven. And at the outset of that discussion, we were like, what you see today is informing that longer term development. So you're saying you want this for the future of Newhaven. So we're testing it now. That's what you're seeing. And then based on what we learn from that and what the market tells us as well, that will inform what happens next. So I think it's always rehearsing that story back to those people who have told you it, and to see, to learn from what we're doing. Like for me, it's a kind of active learning that will take place, probably certainly in Newhaven 25 years. But
yes, it was that phrase that sparked my ears and made me ask the question earlier, but no, thank you. And Stephen, sort of same question for you in the different communities in and across the city of Perth. How do you think you've gone about that?
I think there's a couple of things that have been really important for us. I think, first of all, the whole idea of having a pride in your place. I mentioned as part of my introduction that one of the strengths that we've got is that we're in the heart of Scotland, and we're so close to a number of the big other fellow cities in Scotland. But I think conversely, that led us to hide our light under a bushel and not celebrate the fantastic place that we were. So rekindling first a sense of pride in the city and the wider region has been really, really important in getting people engaged. So a feeling that they can actually contribute. I think the second thing has been that the Leadership Forum has been incredibly important, and the work that the Leadership Forum has done in pushing people outwards and trying to get their heads up above just their local region. That conference that we had at the back end of last year that drew together examples from all across Europe was useful in the sense that it got people to consider things that they wouldn't have considered before. What I thought was really incredible for the people that were attending it was to hear from other cities in Europe how impressed they were about the things that we were doing here in Perth. So again, that created a sense of pride and a sense that, yeah, we can actually achieve something here. So one of the other final things that we did very, very deliberately was that we wanted to get a youth voice involved in the discussion and the conversation, because my sort of sense has been in the past that you get quite a narrow demographic that gets involved in consultations. It doesn't represent the community, and actually it doesn't often represent the people who can really drive change in our community. And that was why we thought using the youth voice was incredibly important, and that's a central part of how we work.
And that was incredibly diplomatically put, if I can imagine the groups that you may have been referring to. So thank you for that. Yeah, I am struck that from what everybody's said, it might take a long time and it might be quite hard work, but absolutely fundamental to driving long-term change is having this community on board with you and brought into the story. So if I've heard that correctly from today, that seems important. The next question we've got is a bit more nuts and bolts in a way, and a bit more back to what Caroline really kicked us off with at the beginning of the day, which is, what do the panel think is the most viable workspace model for town centres moving forward? So I think in a general sense, how we see work in towns, I think would be a good thing to reflect on. But then very specifically, are co-working spaces self-sufficient? And I guess the question probably means financially self-sufficient. But I think let's take how you've seen co-working space work elsewhere, but more generally, how you see the future of work in town centres and how that changes the dynamic of the town. So Caroline, you've probably got most experience, particularly on the financial viability points, but more generally.
Yeah, so as you'd expect, it'll vary on a case-by-case basis. So if you've got an underlying strong office market in the wider area, there's greater potential for you to be able to make a scheme stack up. I think one of the things that we've seen, and I'm sure a number of other people on the call today have been looking to use some of the Future High Street or the LUF funding to inject capital into a new scheme to deliver a flexible workspace, so to modernise some of the space they had. I've already talked about some of the examples of former retail department stores particularly being looked at. So clearly there is a cost in some cases to be able to repurpose workspace from retail into workspace. And in many areas, you will need some support to get that capital investment happening, because the private sector coming into an area and delivering that and then being confident to be able to manage flexible workspace is likely to be a problem in the vast majority of areas. However, a number of areas where you've already got a healthy workspace and a number of landlords who are already operating office space are likely to be able to use their existing facilities facilities to be able to offer more flexible space. So for example, if you've got a landlord, and I know there's a couple I've worked with who've got, you know, 4 or 5 buildings within the town, they may be more than capable themselves of looking at one of those blocks and thinking they might want to operate them going forward as a functional space. But I think in many places, particularly where there's a capital investment need, areas are going to struggle. And I think with all of these things, and it's the same in terms of market halls and office, a flexible working space, it ultimately comes down to having somebody who can curate that space. Corinne talked about some really good examples of how she's looking at creative space that builds upon the underlying strengths of Newhaven, and that's really important. It's not just about trying to create space that is the same as any other place, but really thinking about the type of space that you want. So if we're thinking about artists and creatives, actually the capital investment to create space for them doesn't necessarily need to be very expensive. So ultimately it comes down to the individual places and really thinking about what type of workspace or employment space works in your place, and then recognizing in many cases it is going to be a collaborative exercise where the public and the private sector may need to start to kickstart something in the short term, but in the long term we should be able to see things becoming more viable.
And it does as well pick up on that point you made in your opening remarks about, and which I was very struck by, is local investors and people who've got local interest in doing this for their local area, which is quite powerful, quite a powerful thought. No, thanks, Caroline. John, anything that strikes you about maybe co-working spaces, but maybe town centres more generally in terms of work?
I think that's the important bit, and it's back to different town centres taking on this role need to think about the facilities and environment that people want to enjoy. So there's the actual workspace, but then there's also thinking about things like, well, people want, you know, to go for a coffee to meet up. There's that sharing of space outside. There's public realm. Is the seating areas there? Can you go out in the park and sit down at lunchtime and etc. If you're encouraging people to cycle in who are going to work, is there somewhere to store the bike safely and things like that? If there are access ways in, are they well lit and are they safe? I just think that there needs to be, you know, there's a whole lot of thinking needs to go on about the facilities that go with people working in some of these different centres, which have to be provided, because otherwise they're not appealing. It's the same at the end of work. People in the city often stay for a drink at the end of work. Well, why wouldn't they want to do that in their local town and do that? So, but that needs a nice environment. Is there a wine bar there or a gym bar, etc., that's going to provide that? So I think it's more than just the actual workspace. It's the whole of the actual town or whatever, thinking differently about what it provides to support that to happen.
Thanks, John. And Corinne, if I may, I mean, similar question, but I am struck that many people on this call will, you know, towns don't exist in isolation. They'll have neighbours, they'll have strong competitors. I don't know whether competitors is the right word, but they'll have strong neighbours and weaker neighbours. Just interested in terms of how you see the future of work. You mentioned you're 8 or 9 miles from Brighton. Has Brighton been pulling in wealth from Newhaven over the years, or is there an opportunity to benefit from the overspill from Brighton? How does that dynamic work?
I think it's really interesting you pick up on that point, because definitely Brighton's overheated, I think, in terms of the creative sector. So property has got very expensive and there isn't the affordability now, particularly in the creative sector, to take the kind of workspace they're looking for. So for us, I think we're definitely benefiting from that, but we don't want to be seen as an overspill of. So the story for us was really important in terms of that unique identity for Newhaven. And interestingly, some people are kind of, I suppose, rejecting Brighton a little bit. They feel like it's done already and a bit polished, and equally Hastings has got its thing going on. And so I think Newhaven is curious to people because it's in a good location. people call it cheap, I say it's affordable. You know, there's lots of land and old buildings that we can repurpose. So I think for us, you know, it wasn't starting with the idea of let's create workspace. It was starting with the premise of, well, what do people actually want? You know, they're saying this is what they want the town to be. So what facilities, infrastructure do we need? And then we went about the exercise to say, well, where does that exist? What could we use? What do we have already? Where should we put it? So that's where we came up with the creative one in the town centre. But also Caroline made a really good point about functionality, that, you know, for the creatives, they want high ceilings and flexibility, and they're moving things in and out. It might be a bit dirty, certainly with our makers. And equally for us with the marine sector, they were saying that they want to, particularly with Brexit opportunity, the opportunity to expand on processing, the fish processing, how they bring the fish in, the opportunity now to sell into the cloud. It's the market's changing. So the functional space they need and the workspace, the office space around that is also different. So we've responded to, knowing they're the sectors we're trying to grow on, we've responded to what they're telling us they need with the buildings and locations that we have already. And I think the last thing I would say as well is about the operators, the curators of that space. So again, we've gone locally. So Brighton have several really good operators, curators of creative workspace. So we've been talking to them to see how we can partner on a kind of profit share basis in terms of financial sustainability. And with marine, it's looking at, again, we're part of a cluster of ports. How do we work with them to bring their knowledge and expertise in to run that marine hub? So it's knowing what you can do yourself, isn't it, and what others can do, and how you share that, like I was saying in my presentation, how you share the risk and how you share the gains.
Yeah, thank you. No, I see that. And I also see that Perth's somewhat different. I mean, firstly, it's a city. My sense is that actually Dundee has had more of a regeneration issue around old industries in decline. But I'm also struck, and it might be interesting to hear, this idea of a 15-minute city, which in some ways strikes me as almost the perfect size in some ways post-pandemic. So Stephen, what's your views on all that?
Yeah, you're right. I think Dundee, which is probably about 3 or 4 times the size of Perth, has had that benefit where things did get really bad in terms of unemployment, and it used to be the city of Jan Jute in journalism, and it's been transforming itself over the past decade, and investment in office space is part of their mix. We're slightly different, and I think I mentioned earlier on about the creative exchange, where we created some specific workspace that was really suited to artists, craftspeople, and the artisans, linked into that sort of independent culture that I was talking about being part of our story. One of the other things on the other end of the spectrum that we're looking at is an eco hub on the west of the city that would partly involve logistics. We've even had discussions ourselves actually at Stagecoach about whether or not we could co-locate our depot out there, because we're looking to transform into a net zero operation over the next few decades. I think the point about our region to think about is that we've got a lot of small satellite towns, north, south, east and west, Kinross, Crieff, Blairgowrie, Aberfeldy. And actually what we're trying to do with some of them is use the fact that you can actually base yourselves anywhere if you've got good broadband connectivity and benefit from the tremendous quality of life that you've got here. So it probably plays into what John was talking about earlier on about it being part of the whole thing. So it's about living and working, I would see, putting together as one complete package.
Yeah, thank you. And I wanted to pick up then more generally, and maybe stay with you, Stephen, as the first question. But John's introduced, well, I think you've all introduced, but John particularly introduced this idea about suitability of leadership and structures. And before today's call, I'd probably have said Scotland, more interventionist in economic development terms, Scottish enterprise pretty proactive, lots going for it. But actually, thinking about what people have said today, that local dynamism, that community, and definitely building up from the ground up makes me wonder whether Scottish Enterprise are the icing on the cake, but actually the crucial thing is that community engagement. How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think the local structures that you put in place are a lot more important than the sort of formal elected structures that you have. I mean, it's often said in Scotland here that we're big fans of devolution when it comes to devolving from Westminster, but maybe not big fans of devolving from Holyrood further down into local communities. And that's where it's been really important, the role that the private sector has taken in all of this. And to be fair, actually, I would say that the sort of the openness of our local authority here to embrace other ways of working, because politically, leaders are the ones that carry the can every few years when they go to the ballot box. I think what they have understood is that actually the leadership forum can open up a lot of the difficult conversations that probably are politically challenging for them. So, for example, things that we want to do around about creating more sustainable mobility in the city, improve air quality, more green space in the city centre. These are things that can be quite challenging for local authorities and politicians because, people are quite wedded to their cars and people are naturally reticent to change. So I think they understand that in terms of the conversation that you want to have around about the changing role of our city centres, we're actually part of the answer and an important part of the answer.
Yeah, thank you. That is interesting. And Caroline, I'll come to you next if I may. I'm struck that you probably don't want to name names in terms of clients, but just ideas around different local authorities, just what it takes in a local authority or in different local structures to deliver some of this stuff most effectively. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to name names in terms of Manchester City Council, and I think some of the messaging resonated that Corinne mentioned around that, the positive, how are we going to do this? I think classically, Manchester was seen as an authority where things happened because they didn't say no, they said, how are we going to do this? And for me, the best local authorities across the country are the ones that don't say, no, we can't, it's not been done, we can't do that. The ones that are able to think about how they can make a difference. And I think picking up Steve's point around the importance of the public and the private coming together, I think the need that both groups need to listen. So what I've seen where groups have come together, particularly around Town Deal, where there's the private sector sometimes think, oh, the local authority, they just sort of drag their heels around stuff, they don't get on with things. Actually, there's almost a naivety sometimes of the private sector not understanding some of the things that the local authorities have been trying to do to unlock difficult brownfield sites or bring difficult buildings back for years and years and years. And it's not just because they can't be bothered, it's because it's really hard and it doesn't stack up. But where the groups come together and listen to each other and understand that the local authorities understand the processes and can unlock public money, and the private sector can actually be much more focused about getting things done around, instead of talking about it, that you work with the strengths of both of the groups and all those that sort of sit in between, and that's when really great things happen.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. And I'm struck that actually everybody on this call has described good experiences of that work. Maybe next time we do this, we want to invite some of those places that never stop falling out with one another, and we'll see how they've managed to progress. But John, any sort of concluding comment? I mean, I think you probably most provocatively interjected this part of the discussion. Any more thoughts you had around it?
And my comments were absolutely no way anti-local authority. There are some great local authorities.
Wasn't suggesting that at all.
No, and some great councils. I just think that at the end of the day, what we're doing is missing a massive trick in terms of there are a lot of people, and even more so after the last 18 months, who are really passionate about the community, really want to get involved, who just don't know how to do it. and there is no route for them to do it generally. And I think, you know, it's finding the way to get that talent involved, you know, because you've got some great people there. And as Caroline rightly said, this is about them both listening to each other. And it's about also the local authority not seeing it as a threat, seeing it as a massive opportunity, because, you know, local authorities are sat there, God bless them, with very limited resources that are getting ever more limited by the day, a very challenging situation. And I think you've heard from Steve and Corinne how, you know, they are both benefiting the local authorities there and allowing difficult conversations to happen about trying to, you know, let the private sector and others do some of the challenging stuff. And there is absolutely that naivety about process and stuff that has to happen that Caroline described. And why wouldn't there be? Because at the end of the day, I wouldn't expect the private sector to understand all of the nuts and bolts of that. And why should they? But it's a powerful force for good if you can get people on a neutral place agenda, which is neutral and isn't about politics. That is massively powerful, and it's just win-win for the place. And I think everywhere you see it, and the community love to see that as well, because they're part of that, but they're also seeing some other leaders step forward who aren't just politicians. As I say, that isn't negative to politicians, it's just widening it.
Yeah, thanks, John. I agree. Corinne, I think with the way that the clock looks, it may be down to you to offer the final thoughts around structures, leadership, and how you brought your community together.
I think just to say that this is a culture change, isn't it? It's huge. And for as long as it's taken for the culture to get this way in terms of this paternalistic view of communities looking to local government, the council, to do everything for them, the council's adopted that and taken that on. So too it will take time to reverse that and allow the space for other stakeholders, talented stakeholders with money, to help to deliver this. And I think that's where this sense of, for once in my 20-year career in Regen, we're talking about the place. We're not talking about organizations, we're not talking about projects, we talk about the place. And I think that's where we get traction by us coming together. But it will take time, because it's years and years of us getting to this point. So and surely with COVID, for me, the thing that this has shown us is that suddenly that change can be accelerated. If there's really a requirement to do so, we can do it. It's kind of hearts and minds. So it's our jobs as ambassadors for our towns, for our places, to help make our friends at the town hall, to make that as easy as possible, and to demonstrate it works. So that would be my concluding thought. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Corinne. And I'm struck that actually what we've hit upon through a lot of this morning discussion is around stakeholders and communities and getting some momentum. But instead of those just being words that are usually in the footnotes of an economic development proposal, they're actually front and central, and you shouldn't really start until you've done it, which has come through loud and clear today. So look, I mean, I've taken a huge amount from today myself. It's been really interesting to listen to you all, and I really appreciate all the time and effort that you've put into coming along. So Caroline from Cushman and Wakefield, thank you very much. Corinne down on the south coast in Newhaven, Stephen in well, actually the location in Scotland with the best cup winning football side at the moment as well, it seems, and then John from Thinking Place, who actually whose idea it was to pull this together in response to members really having this at the front of their agenda. So look, really appreciate all of your time and your efforts and your thoughts. And for all of the people who've joined, thank you for coming. We enjoyed the questions. Glad that you were able to make it. And do keep a lookout for other events that the Institute of Economic Development will put on this topic and others in the coming months. We appreciate your membership, and we hope this was useful and interesting. So thank you all very much.